What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and in response to the last video that we made about like Wanda actually being a mutant, that there are a lot more mutants than Wanda, mutants had actually been around for a while before Wanda, that this guy Omar in the comments asked a question, which is a really great question in relation to this. Here's what Omar asked. But why would that be a mic drop moment? Why should Doctor Strange care that Wanda is a mutant? He's never heard the term and never met one, so it's not like dropping that knowledge on him would be some huge moment. Maybe for us, but not Strange. Seems like it has to be something else. That could be part of it, but it's definitely not the biggest part of the reveal. So here's the significance of that, right? I mean, one, to answer that first part of the question, on its face, no, Doctor Strange and the idea of mutants, it wouldn't really mean a whole lot to him. But we'd also have to assume he'd be given some kind of explanation about what mutants are. At the very least, some kind of simple and basic explanation. It wouldn't be one of those things where Xavier's like, hey man, there's mutants in your universe. I mean, it wouldn't really tell him anything, right? Like, right? I mean, you know, it's like telling somebody, there's asteroids in space. Okay, cool. I mean, I guess, whatever, but like, why does that matter to me? That discussion completely changes when it's like, one of them is heading here. Like, that's when that conversation shifts. And it's like, okay, now that's important, right? So if this basic explanation that's given to Doctor Strange is mutants exist in your universe, and what we're talking about here is just rampant power development with no particular range, no defined limit, then that shifts everything up. And the reason why is because if you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, people only ever gain powers under one of like three circumstances, right? Either they gain powers through some kind of science-based event, right? Science going wrong or something like that, or some kind of science experiment. So Peter Parker being bitten by a radioactive spider, Bruce Banner being exposed to gamma radiation, Steve Rogers getting the super soldier serum. It's some kind of technological cause. So I don't know if you really consider it powers, but Tony Stark becoming Iron Man, Carol Danvers being blasted by a Kree ship engine, that sort of thing. And then you go into people learning their powers. So Doctor Strange, Agatha Harkness, so on and so forth. With mutations, it doesn't work that way, right? You're talking about people just being born with powers. And there is no upper limit here. It's not as though when a mutant is born, the most powerful they could be is someone who's like as strong as the Incredible Hulk. Or they're all basically comparable to Captain America, where they can run fast and like they can punch hard. No. There's no limit there. So a person could be born with the power of just enhanced strength, where they are comparable to Steve Rogers. Or a person could be born with the power to alter reality on a universal scale, right? And it doesn't even have to be like some ultra powerful mutant that can wreak havoc, right? There's two examples of this. So let's take, for example, somebody like Vanessa Carlyle. So some of you guys may recall that name. That was the girlfriend of Ryan Reynolds in the Deadpool movie. She is a character called Copycat in Marvel Comics. She's basically just like Mystique. But what differentiates Vanessa Carlyle from Mystique is that Mystique can assume the form of a person. Vanessa Carlyle can assume their form and copy their powers. So let's say that it's someone like Jamie Madrox, the Multiple Man, the guy that can basically duplicate himself. Now let's say that for whatever reason, Vanessa Carlyle has her sights set on just destroying the world. She could just say, okay, cool, I'm gonna copy the powers of Jamie Madrox, and then I'm gonna tell my duplicates, copy the forms of the wives of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, then kill the Joint Chiefs, then replace the Joint Chiefs. I will take out the president, and then I will copy the president. And then we'll nuke Russia, and Russia will respond in kind, and because of entangling alliances, now you've got a global nuclear war, just like that. Now, another really good example of this is that in Daniel Way's Wolverine Origins comic, there was a point where Wolverine, after the events of House of M, had basically relearned, or at least rediscovered, all of his old memories. He remembered everything. There's a point where he breaks into the White House, really like sneaks into the White House, interrogates a high-ranking member of the White House staff, and then leaves. And by the time anybody even learned that he was there outside of that person he interrogated, he was already gone. At any point, he could have taken out the president. The idea of what we saw in the old X-Men movies, right? X-Men 2, where Nightcrawler was like teleporting throughout the White House. I mean, that was overblown and overdrawn. It was for the sake of like drama and like, oh, you know, oohs and ahs and all that kind of stuff. Nightcrawler could teleport in and teleport out and the president would be gone like that. It could happen in the span of like 2 seconds, right? Teleport in and then just like teleport the president 30,000 feet in the air, drop him, and then just teleport to a place, and like that's the end of it, right? The president's gone, just fell 30,000 feet to his death out in the middle of nowhere. Or maybe teleport him to the middle of the ocean and drop him into the Mariana Trench and then teleport out. There's any number of ways those kinds of things can happen, and those are just mutants who are, by all standards of measurement, beta level mutants, maybe alpha level mutants, and like that's it. They're not really mutants who are like overly powerful. Let's use someone who is, right? Let's say, for example, that there is some guy in his 40s, and we're gonna change his origin a little bit for the sake of this particular, and him being rolled over into the MCU. But let's say, for example, there's a guy in his 40s, right? And this guy, for whatever reason, his powers basically manifested late, some moment of duress, or because of the fact that whatever the case is, they just didn't pop up during puberty. The result of this is that they just started popping up, and the guy doesn't know how to control his powers. He's a walking, talking, just path of destruction. When his powers first manifest, he can't control them and ends up destroying his entire city block. And so in response, the authorities arrive, the authorities send him into a higher state of panic, and he starts letting off even more energy, destroying even more things. Now, eventually maybe S.H.I.E.L.D. gets involved or something like that. They manage to successfully launch a strike on this guy. They kill him, but because he's so powerful, he resurrects himself from the dead. That was Matthew Malloy in Marvel Comics. We've got a video on it, right? We've got a video running over just how powerful this guy was. The only way they could defeat him was to go back in time and keep him from being born. It was the only way to destroy this guy, because how else can you kill a guy who can resurrect himself from the dead? And it wasn't as though he wanted to, it was just he couldn't control his powers, so he didn't know how to stop what it was that he was doing, because he was never trained on how to use those abilities. The thing about having mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that it basically shatters the rules that we've been operating by in the MCU up to this point. We're no longer bound by like technological advancement or scientific happenstance or just someone being trained with regards to this development of powers. Now we're at this point where it's hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people who are born. And that on a Tuesday, it's a girl who's born and her powers don't really manifest until she's like 15 years old. And when they do, she basically has the ability to read people's minds, right? And to move stuff with her mind, right? Basically Jean Grey. But then let's say there's a guy born on a Thursday and the nature of his power is to just let off explosive energy. And his powers manifest when he's 5 years old because he's in a grocery store with his mom and he wants to look at some can of tomatoes and his mom won't let him. He throws a tantrum, and because he can let off all this energy, he wipes out 3 city blocks by just exploding, by detonating. That's the kind of thing you're running into. That's the potential that you have here. Basically losing control of the circumstance under which people's powers develop and how to manage that. That's why in the comics, the federal government launched Project Wide Awake, contain and control the mutant threat. Because now it's not one of those things where like Peter's bitten by a radioactive spider, his powers are manageable. It's just a few instances here and there of people gaining abilities. Now it's anyone at any point in time can suddenly develop powers, and they could be a person that's a credible threat to all of existence, or they could simply just destroy the world by thinking about it. Not only that, that's in the moment right now. Assuming that Doctor Strange 2 doesn't wipe out the entirety of the multiverse at the end of the film, which I still think they are. I still think they're gonna consolidate the entirety of the multiverse down into like a singular universe and basically go forward from there. But the whole idea, the whole plot of Doctor Strange 2 will basically allow them to grab like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men and Deadpool and all those different properties and bring them into the MCU itself. But assuming that doesn't happen and you have all these alternate realities, now you've got mutants in alternate universes. And while that may not seem like it matters because there's stories that we may never see or hear from, I would counter that with Clyde Wincham. Clyde Wincham was a guy who lived in what was supposed to be the real world in Marvel Comics, but basically he had the power to alter reality. He basically resurrected his dad from the dead, which freaked his mom out, so she cracked him over the head with a candlestick and basically left him in what was almost like a catatonic state, like a vegetative state. The only thing that ever made him happy was reading his comics. When the nurses at the home took those away from him, he basically used his powers to alter reality to bring all the superheroes and supervillains from like the Marvel Comics universe into his world. He snatched them out of their universe and brought them into his own. And we're not talking about like just Captain America or anything like that. We're talking about all kinds of people, Doctor Doom, so on and so forth, all the way up to like Galactus, right? It was nuts. Now, eventually a different alternate reality version of himself ended up becoming the Marquis of Death, a guy who was so powerful, he was wiping out universes with a wave of his hand. Now, do I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe will go that far off the rails? No. But the point that I'm making here, and the reason why it would matter to Doctor Strange, is that at this moment right now, at least as far as we're aware, before we go into Doctor Strange 2, the two most credible threats Stephen Strange has to contend with is Wanda and like Dormammu, right? Dormammu is basically locked away in his own dark dimension, and there's no indication that he's managed to find a way to escape from it. We don't really even know how far down the rabbit hole we're going with Wanda, how villainous she may be, or even on what level her power exists. She seems to exist in terms of being able to alter reality on a universal scale, but all we've seen her do is manipulate the town of Westview. So we don't know how expansive her abilities are. We know she's destined to be more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme, but is she going to die before she ever reaches that point? We don't really know. But those are like two people, right? Imagine if Doctor Strange had to concern himself with 500,000 people who had a wider range of different abilities, going from being able to read and manipulate the minds of everybody on Earth to being equal to the Infinity Gauntlet in just sheer raw power and reality manipulation abilities. That's why it would matter to Doctor Strange, because just the level of threats would increase exponentially, and it would basically happen overnight, depending on how they decide to introduce them and what Doctor Strange intends to do about them. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Hopefully that answered your question. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.